Hi everyone, welcome to the very first episode of Eco Voices, where I, Shweta Prasad, along with my co host Devsmita Biswas. Hey Devsmita. So, we are here to share real stories that can inspire and connect folks. Today's episode is especially close to my heart as we talk about life at IIT, where both Devsmita and I studied, and the mental and emotional struggles students face there, particularly in the context of recent tragic events that happened at IIT Kharagpur that we'll dive more into in a second. We'll discuss the pressures, support systems, and our experiences as people who have actually been there with the hope of offering empathy and inspiration to all of you who are listening. Joining us today actually is someone who has also walked this path and knows firsthand the trials and triumphs of IIT life. So I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Ratun Lahiri, who is an esteemed alumna of IIT Kharagpur, class of 91. Ratun is currently a senior advisor at Unicorn India Ventures in the UK. She's also been instrumental in strengthening alumni outreach, particularly for the UK chapter of Kharagpur, for which she was honored with the Distinguished Award in 2019. So, Ratun, we are so grateful to have you here today to share your insights and your journey with our audience.
Thank you, Shweta, and hello, Debbie. Devashmita, lovely to meet both of you, and congratulations on what you're doing. This is much needed, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, we have been trying to get you on for a while now, Ratun. So glad we are finally here to chat today. Let's get started with a quick lightning round of questions to help our audience get to know you better. Uh,
Certainly.
okay, so the first one is give us your intro OP style. OP is the orientation program that we used to have at Kharagpur as newcomers who had joined. So, which department, where are you from, Ratun?
Yeah, so I'm a mechanical engineer from IIT Kharagpur class of 1991. Essen Hall. At that time, there was only one hall of residence for women in IIT. I am Bengali. I come from Calcutta, though my father and my mother, my father had a transferable job, and we traveled all over India, and ultimately, came to IIT from Calcutta. My last few years of schooling, I did in Calcutta, and then I came to IIT Kharagpur.
Okay, awesome. And what was the best thing about IIT KGP for you?
It was a dream come true. My father is an IIT alumnus. He's a mechanical engineer, 1960 batch. And it was almost always my dream to come to IIT Kharagpur. So coming to IIT Kharagpur was, getting into IIT was actually a dream come true. And for me, it was not just the education, the training in terms of, my mechanical engineering degree, but the person it made of me, in those 4 years,
Mm,
the totality of the experience.
right. And so maybe if you could go back and change one thing about your life at IIT, what would that be?
I would study a little more.
Uh-huh.
The first year I studied very much because I entered, I did not have, I wanted to study mechanical engineering, but I had entered with agricultural engineering, and I wanted a transfer. And I don't know about your times, Shweta, but in our times, we were allowed to transfer departments if we did well in our first year. So the
Mhm,
first year I studied very, very, very hard and switched to mechanical engineering, which was my dream. And
mhm.
after that, I did everything but study, but I did get through.
Like done with it. I studied for the entire 4 years in the first year. That's what you might have been feeling in that moment. Okay. And what is your current passion, Ratun?
My current passion is the work that I'm doing now. I'm senior advisor at Unicorn India Ventures. This is an India-focused venture fund that invests in technology startups in India. So we raise money abroad, and in fact, we are just about to close our third fund, which is a $150 million fund, and we will invest all this in India. And to see the audacity of dreams, to see the brilliant entrepreneurs, to see what is happening, I think this is uh, I think this is the best part of my entire career so far.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, that was really fun. So I think those are the few questions that I wanted to ask you straight up.
I mean, I want to say like I resonated with a lot of Ratun's answers. I wish I had also studied a little bit more in IIT Kharagpur. I also come from Calcutta, and I like, yeah, going to IIT was a dream, but I think, yeah, I wish I had done a little bit more.
Right. And so, what we'll do is maybe get into the topic that we wanted to discuss today as a group. So, essentially, talk about life at IIT when going gets tough. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. So, we want to voice our opinions on this in light of recent tragic events at our alma mater. Mhm.
Yeah, let's dive into it. As you all know, there was a recent suicide case at IIT KGP.
Hmm.
So, a 21-year-old fourth year student, Devika Pillai from the Department of Biotechnology at IIT Kharagpur, was found hanging in her hostel room. And this happened September 18th, I think last year.
Hmm.
And although the case is suspected to be a suicide, the investigations are still ongoing. We actually don't know exactly why it happened, but according to very recent reports, we know that by March of 2023, 34 students from across different IITs, men and women, have died by suicide over the past 5 years. So this is like when I heard of the stat, this was quite concerning. And in various investigations that have happened and various reports that have come out, there have been various different reasons. We don't want to like point to just one particular reason, but there have been various reasons like academic pressure, cultural background differences, linguistic differences. Like when I went to IIT, we had a lot of students who did not speak Bengali. They were very different linguistically, and they used to form a huddle within themselves to cope with the pressures. There's also like a lot of stigma around getting help when you're like when going gets tough. I don't know, when I was growing up, it was more about like you're not encouraged to talk about things that are tough. You're encouraged to like go through them and solve them. So there is a lot of stigma around that. And also in general, there is like when I was in IIT, which was 2012, very different from the time when Ratun was. So there were very limited resources even in 2012 to deal with any of these. These are some of the things that have happened, and these are some of the reasons. And Ratun, I wanna talk to you about like what was your experience in IIT when it comes to these academic pressure, mental health issues, and what was your experience like? How did you go about resolving them? If you would share, that would be amazing.
Thank you. I think that's a very good synopsis. I don't think it has changed very much, Devushmita, because, even in our times, we had students from very different backgrounds coming to IIT Kharagpur. I mean, from very different socioeconomic backgrounds, from very different parts of India, in terms of and language skills, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what used to happen is they somehow, it all used to gel together. Students somehow, after they we had a I know it's much frowned upon, but we had an initial orientation period, after upon entry into IIT, and somehow after that, I mean, people would get together, and you would find the ghettos were still there. There were still groups within groups, etc., etc. Amongst the boys, particularly, not so much amongst the girls, because girls were very few in number anyway, in terms of that, and they they could not really be ghettos that way. But that used to be there, So I think that is an issue that has continued through the years, from what I hear you say. It was there in our times. It was also there in yours. In terms of academic pressure, I think what I noticed is there were many people, who come to IIT, and very many people, I mean, everybody is a star, I mean, that gets in, and they've been a star in their school, they've been a star in their, in their family community, that they're coming from. So they suddenly come in and they see that, they're not really that bright compared to XYZ. We had people who were AI all India rank 3, all India rank 16, And very soon, I can tell you the way I coped. Very soon I realized, that there is just no point in fretting over academics. I mean, one will never. There are some things that are God gifted. You can't really do that. The best is to do your best. To put your chin up and go get through. And I think most people do that. And that's how people got through, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
resonate with that. True. I think uh like everything that both of you talked about, right, it's just so real in my mind. Like I almost feel like I'm right now at IIT and experiencing some of those, pressures. Like it
Mm,
was definitely like, IIT was a great experience. It, blossomed me into who I am today. But definitely the pressures that one faces, especially as a young individual, right?
mm,
And without having a good support system, something that I hope that we can change, in few years. If I don't know how much time that will take. But for example, academic pressure that we're talking about, right? Like one is the I think in my experience, it used to be like your value and worth was somehow time and again shown to you by, everyone around you. Like it's your grades, or it's your positions of responsibility. Hey, I'm the general secretary of this, or TSG VP or whatnot. So it's just the competition that people faced, not just around themselves but in their minds, to excel at things which they may or may not have liked to do, but
mm,
it's like something that they had to go after, was immense, right? There was another thing which was like social pressure local to the IIT. Like there's social pressure, like personal pressure otherwise, from family and yourself, to expect to get an excellent job. Like, people are trying everything from CAT to GMAT to GRE to UPSC, because 80% chance that they didn't choose a stream of study, they just took whatever they were thrown into, right, by the virtue of ranks. So it's like you come with this expectation that, hey, you cleared the IIT exam and then you are set.
mm,
That's what you've heard all those, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number of years you have been thinking about getting into an IIT, and grinding yourself to almost death in books and coaching centers and whatnot, right? And all of a sudden, there is this mismatch of expectations when you get there, because you see, oh, it's not easy. Like, I'm not done yet. It seems like there's so much more to do, right? So
mm,
that's personal pressure. And then there's this social pressure, which is just so much local to, at least in my IIT experience. One was this OP, right? Which was, I felt for me, it was pressure to socialize, because I was very introverted. Like,
mm,
and I think the way it was done, like it's like you're just thrown into it, right? Like especially in the girls' hostel, it was in the first year, first semester itself, whereas the guys used to get 1 year, and then second year they used to have whatever orientation. So coming from this very introverted like background, for me it was really hard to connect to any people. Like I started to hate it, like very truly speaking. I didn't like it very much in the beginning, and
mm,
slowly got induced into it. But yeah, it could have been better for sure.
mm,
Adjusting to your roommates, as early adult folks who, people get into like relationships that may or may not be right for them, and then
mm,
stigma around relationships, like people not wanting to talk about, hey, I'm in this relationship. So it, again, it comes from where the background you come from, right? And being able to like be upfront, or even like sharing about what you might be going through in your life. So yeah, I think there's just so much that people face in general, like in colleges, and especially from our experience coming from IIT. I think it is definitely something which needs you to be armed better when you are going through life at these colleges.
totally. I think some of the things that I want to reflect on, like all both of you said, I want to reflect on a little bit on the academic pressure. I kind of feel, after living in the US for a little bit, I kind of feel like how Indian systems are very rank based. Like
mm,
it's always about getting the first rank in school, or always about getting the right GPA. And when I look back, I kind of think that it would have been so much more wonderful if the systems were promoting more of a holistic growth. Like as soon as you get into IIT, the first thing is like you need to get the right GPA, then you need to get the right internship. So it's like very specific milestones where you're comparing yourself with each other. So the comparison is what put so much pressure onto me. But after IIT, I specifically went to another institute, which was I went to IIM Ahmedabad, and they had done a couple of things which reduced this comparison specifically from academic perspective. And they did this where they did not release our GPAs publicly. Like we just knew our GPAs ourselves. And of course, people are Indian and they're competitive. So they got innovative. Students ultimately figured out who had what GPA. But that reduction in that comparison really helped calm ourselves. And the other thing that I would add was like when we were going for these uh, job interviews, our institute made it a point that they did not release the GPA rank, like did not release GPA only the GPA rankings to the companies. A lot of companies would come and they would say, I just need the GPA of the student, and I would like, do a sorting algorithm on Excel and pick out the best students. And our institute made sure that that kind of sieving students based on just a rank did not happen.
Mm-hmm.
So these little bit of things that were done in that institute as compared to IIT really helped in reducing that. Like the pressure really comes from comparison. Really, it comes. If
I
everybody
think.
got a 5 point GPA, I think everybody would have been happy. But because there is so much of comparison, it leads to so much of mental tension. I think both of you have voiced that.
No, I think you have both of you have raised very valuable points, and Devishmita, in terms of what Ahmedabad has done, I think that is extremely valuable. And I think that is something that really ought to be taken up by the IITs. And, that is something that we must tell the Board of Governors and we must let, bring to the notice of IITs. Absolutely. But I think, and I also hear what you're saying, Shweta, about feeling lonely and being isolated and feeling especially if one is an introvert, it can be very difficult to fit in. When one is so far away from home for the first time ever. For most of us, at least for me, this is the first time ever. I was staying away from home. So it's a lot of adjustment to ask for. From a person still in their teens, so yes, certainly. But I must say one thing to both of you, though. There are two distinct differences from what you tell me from my time at IIT. In our time, number one, our orientation used to happen in the very first year. So we used to have ragging. I'll call it what it was. It was ragging. It was not pleasant. Not always very pleasant. Even for the girls, because people say, "Oh, did you have ragging in Essen Hall?" Yes, we did. I had to go through a lot of ragging. My parents deposited me at IIT Kharagpur and then went away on holiday. So for them, I did not even get to go back over the weekend, home, because my parents were in Calcutta. I could have gone home, over the weekend, and I couldn't. And because I was one of the few people staying back over the weekend, I was also ragged over the weekend. I still remember that. So though I bore it with a smile, and I still smile when I think of it. But at that time it was quite a lot, to take in terms of that. But what happened then? Because we had our orientation very early, it led to lifelong friendships. I mean, I'm friends with our seniors. Even now and forever, in terms of that. I think you guys had your orientation after the second year, so that's one difference, that we have between your times and our times. Number two, in our times, I don't think we were that fussed with GPAs, honestly. I think it was much less competitive from what you describe your time at IIT, because we had these people who were always the silver, the president's gold medalists and the silver medalists of each, we had, as in the toppers of the departments, etc. But then nobody put them on a pedestal. They were just great guys. I know, mechanical engineering, we had our topper. What I used to do is before every exam, I used to cycle to his hall, Patel Hall, take his notes for an hour, and the guys used to hate me for it. Study for an hour and give it back, because I used to study alone, and then there were at least 30 guys waiting for his notes, over there. So even that 1 hour that I took his notes away deprived 30 guys of that. But so the point I'm trying to make is it was much more relaxed in our times. Yes, there were toppers, yes, there were others, but nobody made a fuss of them, or nobody compared GPAs, etc. Your time seemed to have become much more competitive, from that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, our times, I mean, I'm thinking our time was very competitive. I'm wondering, like, kids who are in school right now, how competitive it would have been
Yes,
for them.
exactly. And it's getting worse, every day. Even for our, excuse me, the social cultural activities that you excuse me, that you described, it was all done in a sense of spirit of fun and adventure, and just bonhomie in a sense. I remember I thought, yes, I mean, sometimes it was a little unpleasant, but you just, yeah, for instance, we had elections in our third year. I became GSEC hall, in my third year, for competed again in fourth year to become hall president, became hall president. But it was all of in good stride. I mean, nobody made a big fuss about all that. But I hear what you're saying, and I've also got this feedback from current students, that nowadays it's much, much more competitive, in terms of, people want to be seen to be doing things, and it's become hyper competitive, which is not what it was in our time. Certainly not.
I want to dive a little bit deep because this is coming to me a little bit of a surprise that it was not as competitive as your time. Like it was competitive in our times because primarily I think the number of seats are so less in IIT and the number of jobs that you can get is so less that the competition anyways comes up. And I think in the generations that are now studying in IIT, probably social media is a reason. But I want to understand, Ratun, like if academic pressure was not one of the reasons, what else was there? Like was IIT really fun and games, or what was the other pressures that you used to deal with? And I also want to understand like why there wasn't like an academic pressure. Like was it like everybody would get jobs easily, or what exactly is the reason, or was it just a better time, the 90s?
Yeah, I think life is much more relaxed then, Devishmita, honestly, in terms of that. I think if you see, as we are going through life, life is becoming more competitive and more complex as we go past. In our times, there was no social media.
Right.
Full stop. We had no telephones, I mean, mobile phones, full stop. So if you called your family, relatives, friend, you had to go and make that, that book that call and make that call, in terms of that. So, no mobile phones, no social media, nothing. You were just there in a bubble, in IIT with friends. It is not always fun and games. Whenever you have young, very, group of highly aspirational young people together, there is competition. There is an element of, I would say, hyper competitiveness that creeps in. There is jealousy. There is all of that, certainly. But I'm saying that, and that was certainly there. It was very much there. But I think overall, very clearly, it wasn't, I mean, we were not very fussed about grades, in terms of that. GPA didn't matter all that much. And because I don't think even the companies, that came, asked for the GPA straight away. And, the way you're describing now, I don't think they did it in our times, and also because I think the numbers were much fewer. Nowadays you have so many more graduating from IIT. I think it was that much, but of course, jobs are also many more now. Avenues are also many more. Many more industries have come up, many more companies. But in our times, but I must say that somehow this obsession with grades was not very much there. People did very well, and we said, "Oh well, you've done well, great. Good for you." And everybody took it in their stride. Oh, you're the GSEC Gymkhana, or you're the vice president Gymkhana, or oh, great, and people would, but not a big deal or a fuss was made of it.
That just sounds like such a nice time to be in
It,
IIT,
it
really.
was
Yeah,
actually, it was.
I am really feeling jealous. I think one of the things that have changed, and this has had not happened so much in our times, but one of the things that has changed, and we should talk about it, is social media. And how, like you said, that you didn't have phones and you couldn't contact, but now social media is everywhere. Interestingly, there are 346 million social media users in the age of 18 to 24. So the group that we were when we were in IIT.
Wow. Hmm.
And at your time, there was zero. At our time, it was just growing, and now there are 346 million. And a recent survey from the Mental Health Neurosciences Institute revealed that in this group of people, which are 18 to 24, 45% of them felt pressure to perform better in academics due to
Mm.
comparisons with peers on social media. So in your time, it was non-existent. In our time, it had just started. And now I imagine that there's just so much comparison that's happening. And I'll share my story, and maybe Shweta, you can go ahead and share your stories as well. Like whenever I opened LinkedIn, I have at that time also, like when I was starting, there's this huge sense of FOMO, or a huge sense of
Mm.
not achieving what somebody else is achieving. And I remember at that time Facebook started up, and a lot of our seniors would go to these amazing internships in Europe. And I would be like, wow, you can, if you had better grades, only then you could go to these amazing Europe internships. And I don't have better grades, so I'm not. So there's this huge comparison that's going on, and that's adding to the pressure. And I would like openly declare in this forum that during the internship year, which was the third year, I really was on the verge of feeling suicidal because my entire batch had an internship and I did not. And that was like comparison within. But I think now kids are comparing on the social media as well, like how better somebody's life is because they are better at academics and so on and so forth. So I think that was my experience with social media. I want to hear like what have been your experiences, or what stories have you felt, or what comparisons that you came across in your time.
So yeah, I think social media again, like at our time, it was coming up, right? We had Facebook, we had LinkedIn, and people are always posting these like rosy pictures. I think private lives, they don't remain private anymore with social media.
Yes.
That's the main crux of it. It's like you and everybody just wants to share those rosy pictures, right? Like you want to share a picture of you with a great background behind you, or you want to share the news of, hey, I got this internship or I got into this relationship. And it's like they're flaunting on their social media, but there are these other people who might be desiring for this, for a similar success, and they just end up like feeling like a what should I do and how can I get that and whatnot. So I think that feeling is very like I would almost say like mind numbing in a way, that it takes your focus away from probably being peaceful and working towards what you're working after, versus having these comparative studies going on in your mind. So yeah, for sure, it also gives you a lot of knowledge and information of, hey, what's going on in the world, but it does have its own like downside.
That is beautifully said, Shweta. Your statement that, there are some aspects of life that should remain personal, and of relationships, of life, of everything that should remain personal. That is so beautifully said, because if we expose everything of ourselves, on social media, what is there left? There's no mystery left in life. And, apart from, as you say, mind numbing, and, apart from it being such a gross display of this thing, it's also your own, for one's own mental peace, that there is no corner of myself that I can really live in my own mind. So I think it's a very uh, it's a really good thing that we lived our life in IIT,
Hmm.
without social media. Also, I must add another thing. We had zero, absolutely zero, um, um, uh, attention to clothing, as in terms of what we wore, in fact, we were so poorly dressed. I mean, I remember, flip flops were the uniform for everybody. We wore flip flops and most ordinary clothes, went to class, came back, nobody cared, nobody bothered. Nowadays, what happens with social media also is there's also an image that one wants to portray, of looking smart, looking good, looking gay all the time with a good background, putting up images. There's just too much pressure that one is putting on oneself.
Correct. Like I'll share one story, Deepsmita and Ratun, about I think what was going on and what it might have looked for to these other people who saw me post my internship update on Facebook. So yeah, so I think I was in my first year, I was struggling with studies. Like I just couldn't get through. I was like, oh my god, what's going on in these classes? I would go to all the classes and I would not understand like one bit. So I was like, oh, maybe I'm so dumb. And so I had started like feeling very low confident and everything. And I think somehow I managed to get like a 7.5 or whatever grade. And I worked very hard after that, because I found out that, hey, in my department there is no way to get an internship, so whatever I can do on my own will only help me. So I started to like cold email professors like everywhere, here and there and whatnot. And I finally, like, I was lucky to have one professor from like Europe respond to me, right? And I was like, elated. I'm like, oh wow. And I kind of went and posted that on Facebook, right? And by the way, in parallel, I had to get an NOC certificate from the institute that I was allowed to go for this internship. And because I was in the 5-year dual degree program, and we were not sort of authorized to, or whatever. Like there was no process for people like me to kind of get an internship in my second year. So I take this application and I tell him, hey, I need this. And the first question he asks me is, hey, what's your GPA? Right? And in a very, like, I would say, very condescending tone. Once he heard my GPA, and he just became so condescending. He literally, like, he trashed me, and he kind of almost, I would say, threw me out of the room just because I didn't have a good GPA and I didn't get that NOC certificate. I was so broken. I was so disheartened. I came out crying. And then somehow I figured out with my department, with the heads and everyone, they gave me that letter, which eventually led me to, go to this internship abroad. And in parallel, I had few other batchmates and people who were also struggling with their, internships. But I think all they would have seen, because obviously I didn't go on social media and share what I had faced, right? I only shared the great news of, yeah, I got this internship and I'm going to Europe. uh, and so everybody, they thought that, you have this great opportunity and whatnot. And I got to hear about that later, like, maybe 3 or 4 years later, when we were in a room and discussing everybody's, journey so far. I found out how, people thought I was such a great success while I had faced so many challenges. So yeah, I think that's an example of what shows on surface is not exactly what it is, right, beneath.
No, thank you for your honesty. Let me share something with you, which is beyond, which happened to me after IIT. Since we are also talking about life's journey. I went to the Asian Institute of Management in Manila for my MBA. I got the ITC scholarship to go there, and then in the second year, they again very much like what you have now in IIT. We could have gone to Wharton or Columbia, or there were many other schools in Europe, for 6 months in an exchange program. The only Wharton, was giving the scholarship, for this exchange, and the others you would have to pay for it. So I didn't have, I did not want to, well, maybe I could have, forcefully paid for it, but I didn't want to do that. So I said, I will only go if I get Wharton. And for some reason, let's just not get into details why that happened. I wasn't given Wharton. I was asked to go to Columbia, which meant that I would have to pay for, my, not my tuition, but my living expenses, and the airfare, whereas Wharton was a full scholarship. And I ended up not going to Columbia. And I felt as if my world had collapsed. I
Mhm.
mean, I was so keen to come to the, so, I was at that time mid 24 years old or 25, so a little older than IIT. But I can tell you, I exactly understand what you felt like, Shweta, because I went almost into depression, thinking this is an opportunity. I wanted to go to Wharton, it would have opened up a world of opportunity for me, etc., etc. And look, and see, I didn't get to go, etc. Today, when I look at it, years later, it would have made not an iota of difference to me. Life takes its own turn, you it's fine. But at that time it's so easy to get caught up in it. I think we must learn to trust ourselves and trust the process, and trust life's journey, as my father always tells me. I think that is what I wanted to share.
No, that's so beautifully expressed, Ratun. Like, yeah, can just, like, I think I talked about my GPA, right? And uh post these experiences, I was still working hard in my first year, and I kept my head down. I kept working through the next few years as well, right? And I got to, like, I know it could have gone the other way as well, but just because I kept working hard and believing in myself, irrespective of all the questions that my own mind was, throwing at me and not believing me, I ended up getting like a 9 pointer almost every semester starting from my third year, which was like, I mean,
Wonderful.
even today, I can't believe that I did that.
Wonderful. And Debushmita, thank you so much for Debushmita, thank you so much for telling us about how bad that you almost felt suicidal in your third year. How did you come out of it?
Yeah, I think what happened is, like I said, all my batchmates had gotten an internship. And
Hmm.
then finally, I also landed an internship, which was a dream internship, which was in
Mm-hmm.
Switzerland. And I actually ended up getting a PhD offer from the institute that I went to. But in all of that, I don't think I coped very well. But by listening to both of you, I think one of the things that helps us cope, and I wish that I had that, is like having somebody like you, Ratun, telling us, like, because when you're young, you don't know that life has a lot of ups and downs, and sometimes there is
Absolutely.
a down, there would be an up, and there might be a like even bigger up. And as a 18 and 24-year-old, it's so very important to be connected to either mentors or friends or people who can give you this, broader view about life. I remember when I was in, like, this is something, I'm not comparing IIMs with IIT in any way. I think both the institutes are amazingly well, but we did have these meetups with our seniors who had
Hmm.
like passed out of IIM, and they would just come and they would just come to our local chai shop and they would just sit, and we can just go and talk to them. And these were real people who had faced a lot of, so we had a alumni who came, and he said, he stood up and he said that I have completely failed in my startup. I like went out of IMA and I completely failed out of startup, but then I'm like rebuilding my life. So having these somebody talk to you about like this small dip that you're seeing is just like, this is a quote that somebody said, like these small dips in internships that you might be facing are just like dots and commas in the whole story of your life. They do not really matter when you look back at it. Like you said, Ratun, like when you look back at it, it just doesn't matter. You have achieved so many these things. So if you ask me like how I didn't cope about it well, but I think when I think about all the students who are there in IITs, I think we opening up these forums where if you're going through a very hard time, if you come and talk to us, we'll share these failure stories about us, and then we'll also share
Absolutely.
great things that have happened, and then that would give you confidence that, look, that stupid grade that you didn't get doesn't really matter. And like Shweta said, like if you keep working hard towards your dreams and aspirations, maybe you wouldn't become the topper of the institute, and that's totally fine. Like when you're on your deathbed, nobody really cares. But like really working towards what you really want and knowing that there would be ups and downs in life, that's how it will be easier to cope through these things when you're very, very young.
No, so well said. No, absolutely. And I always remember what my father says to me. I mean, uh, and particularly when he would say this to me when I was very young and in IIT, and I said, "Oh, this hasn't happened, that hasn't happened," and he'd say, "Ratun, it's always good to see what hasn't happened or who's ahead of you. Have you also seen who's with you and who's behind you? In terms of that, look at that also and see how happy people are even without what you have. So don't always fuss about what you don't have." And today I think of those words and I think, I say a thank you to my father every day, now for telling me all this, because it's so important to remember this. But like as both of you say, like you, I have also been through exactly the same journey. That I must have this, I have, and if I don't have this, that's the end of the world. I think that happens when you are in a very competitive environment, that when you've pushed yourself to I think that happens particularly in the IITs and IIMs, because you've pushed yourself to really get into that institute, and then
Yeah.
you think that I have to do equally better to stay on the treadmill, and I have to excel to get that, and you're always in a competitive mode, and that really leads to burnout.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think this getting into these institutes is itself is such a big struggle where you have to
Mm.
like rightly said. Like, you have excelled in your life, you've gotten whatever like the billion population is dreaming for, and when you reach around here, it's like the journey continues. I think just thinking about the solution, I think it's very important for when you're younger specifically. It's very important, I feel it's very important for authoritative figures in your life or in your
Mm,
job or whatever to really talk about how important holistic growth is. Just like your father was a authoritative figure in your life,
mm,
like you would
mm,
listen to what you would trust what. I think
mm.
that's what's like missing. My parents were not so involved in my academic life, so they never like stepped in and said like it's gonna be fine. But when you're younger, you really need somebody to be like somebody you trust and you respect to come and say like, look at all the people who would die to be at the position that you are in, and you really need to have a holistic growth, and it's not just about grade. I think that's really needed, and I wish that that was something that was provided to me as part of the institute or something. Like, I can just maybe talk to a great senior like Ratun and share my hardships, and maybe you could have shared like it's gonna be okay. That would have made my mental peace much better while I was like living this life in IIT.
Devjit, I must tell you this. Although I was given a lot of advice, I'm not, well, not a lot of advice. I was told from time to time, and I, when you're young, you don't always listen. It's only when you're older that wisdom comes in, steps in. But jokes apart, I think it's very true. And this particular instance, I remember. So after my MBA, I wanted to get into consulting, and I didn't know what consulting was, and it was a very new industry in India. And McKinsey had just come in, and they asked me some, I still remember the question, what, when I mentioned Switzerland to you, what comes to mind? And I was meant to have said precision technology, and basically because of their watchmaking, and et cetera, and all of the insurance, etc. And I said something about mountains and Alps, etc. So that was not that was not quite what they expected of me. To cut to the chase, I did not get McKinsey, but I got PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was in buckets of tears. And I remember calling up my parents from Mumbai and saying, but Baba, Ma, I didn't get McKinsey. And I still remember my father saying, it does not matter. You want a consulting career, you've got PwC, put your heart and soul into it. You will enjoy what you're doing, in terms of that. Today, when I look at it, and my son is 24, he works for McKinsey. When I look at it and I think back and I say, so right. But, at that time, you don't think about it. It's so easy to get caught up in not getting McKinsey has not made an iota of difference to my career, not at all. But, at that point, it was the end all and be all of life. But it's so important to face these failures. I remember one question that they had asked me in my first, in Cadbury's, my first job after IIT was Cadbury's, and they said to me that a very perceptive HR, Vice President HR, I still remember, he said to me, Ratun, do you know how to handle failure? And I didn't understand the question at that time. He said, well, so far, you wanted IIT, you've got IIT, you've done well academically, you're here, but will you know how to handle failure when you face failure? I didn't quite understand him, in terms of that. Later, when this whole thing happened with McKinsey, I remembered what he had said to me, and that is so true.
I think one of the things that you said about this job, I wanted to highlight this. I think when we are in IITs, we have put so much pressure on getting that first job, because the whole environment is about like who got the best
Yeah,
salary, and it's very, but like that first job is just one stepping stone. Like, I have
exactly.
changed 5, 6 jobs, and today I work at Google. And when I was in IIT, I would have never imagined that a company like Google would be interested in a dumb person like me. But that's not like, so I think in colleges, this whole students specifically put a lot of pressure on getting on the right job. I would just say like, do your best and get like go into a field that you're interested in, and then figure it out. Like, don't go
Absolutely.
fields that are, I made a mistake of going into a field that was one of the highest paying jobs in the campus, and it was an absolute disaster. So I made that wrong decision. My advice to anybody who's like young and listening to this podcast would be like, your first salary doesn't matter. You would change so many jobs, you'll get so many more promotions, you would get so many more ups and downs. So don't put all your pressure into, like, don't be in a pressure cooker to get the best job in the college. It just doesn't really matter. It's a, like you said, it's an iota, really, really.
Absolutely. Just enjoy. The best thing to do is to just sit. Don't take your eye off the ball. Never ever. But relax, enjoy life. And when you're enjoying life and doing something in a relaxed way, it will all fall in place. It does. It really does. And you'll actually be a better version of yourself, in terms of, and you'll be a happier person. You'll make people around you happier. And I think it will also give you more energy to do better.
So, shall we talk about how, like, we have been talking about, hey, how it would have been great if we had you, Ratun, maybe when we were in college to talk to, right? Since you were a senior. So, how can folks, like, sort of reach out to people, to their alumni today? Like, what resources kind of exist for folks, or something that's coming up?
Sure. So let me tell you this, Devshmita and Shweta, I'm very proud of both of you, for what you're doing. Because as I said, and I will say this again, when I first read the transcript that you'd sent to me, I said to myself, this is so professionally done, and you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. And that is the crying need of the hour today in our colleges, not just in IIT, but, for our India is a very young population, for our young population, for our young entrepreneurs, for everybody, to know that, there is that life is ups and downs, life is also failures, and that there is nothing called a perfect life. It's just a journey, and therefore what you've started is a very important thing. I think, you should keep this podcast going. You should add to it. And certainly we must publicize it. We must make this available. As you have these conversations, we must make this available to the students at IIT Kharagpur, both boys and girls. Whoever wants to listen later, you can also expand it to, the guys if they want to, the men if they want to talk about this, so that people know this. I think that's one thing. I think B, also in terms of, we should do something called a mentorship nowadays. And that goes back, I think, to what you were saying, Devshmita, in terms of what was used to happen at IIM Ahmedabad, where people just come and sit in the chai shop and say, come and talk to me. And isn't that what it's all about? In our extended joint families when we were growing up, if you didn't want to talk to your mother, you talk to your masi, or you talk to a bua, or you talk to your uncle, or your father or your cousin. You just want somebody to give you a patient hearing. And that patient hearing, sometimes you just, and that's what we need to give our students, at IIT. So I think first what we should really do is, these podcasts that you're doing, make them available to students, and make it available in a proper way through the institute, and we must talk to the director and the deans and make this widely available. I think you're doing a fantastic job, and it needs publicity, number one. Number two, I think we should start a mentorship program where even we say, seniors, put your hands out and hands up and say that we volunteer our time, for a year, for 6 months, for 3 months, whatever. And, we will mentor one student, two students, five students, whatever. Not even just mentor, just talk to people, so that people know that, that there are students, that there are others who have gone through the journey, that, et cetera, just for a conversation. And we should start that.
Yeah, totally. I think well said, Ratun. I think that is of prime importance as well. So it's not like you can probably go and talk to everybody, but trying to find at least some sort of a group where your ideas might resonate, where your challenges will resonate, right? And that's where I think, Ratun, what you're saying is it's a super idea.
No, absolutely. And as you rightly say, you have to have the same thinking, the wavelength, many, many things have to gel. My only caveat here, Shweta and Devsmita, would be, the mentors that we take in, from across the years, my vintage, vintage before me, the 2000s, you guys, you're from 2010 to 2020, etc. Whoever comes in, we must screen, you must screen very well to make sure that they are in the right zone to give the right, guidance, because these are very vulnerable young people that we are, that we are going to be talking to, and we cannot, so we must make sure that, we do not, that we give them the right steer. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. I hope that Ratun's story and mine and Devsmita's story as well and these discussions we had today about the challenges we faced at IIT and beyond have given our listeners not only insights but also hope. Life's difficulties can feel overwhelming, but as we have shared, it's those moments that shaped us and built our resilience. So, for anyone out there who is going through a tough time, remember that you're not alone and it's okay to ask for help. We're part of this bigger community, and your well being really matters to us.
Beautifully said, both of you, and very proud of both of you for what you're doing. This is truly a one of a kind initiative, and I wish you every success. And please do take it forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for all our listeners, if you have enjoyed this episode or know someone who could benefit from hearing it, please share and subscribe. We'll obviously make this episode available to anybody and everybody who wants to hear it. And we'll bring more powerful conversations, and we'll follow up with the mentorship program and how exactly we can pair people who would love to talk to us and other amazing alumni. And we also want to talk to amazing students who are in IIT right now. So until next time, take care. And remember, just like Shweta said, you're not alone in this journey. We all have gone through this, and you can go through this too. So thank you so much. And thank you, Ratun, for joining us in this podcast.
Thank you. Bye-bye.